how to
do that with mine.
Yeah, it's a very good way to remember my name.
That
can be a problem.
Yeah, I'm Eric.
Just got back from England yesterday.
I'm the slave of Frankie.
Yes, he's my right hand. I am Frankie Weinberger. Yes.
How I know.
Yeah,
Yoga?
yeah, yoga. Oh, yeah, down at the senior center. Yeah, I teach there.
It's a small world, right?
Yeah.
I'm Maury.
And I'm Shelley, his better half. Not really.
Hi guys, Avi Fuchs. Just moved here a couple months ago. It's good to know that I already know most of the people here and started to feel like I'm, more familiar with the people here. Yeah.
Beth, I'm his oldest.
Matt.
Joey.
Karen. Carol.
Okay, well, thank you for everyone. And Joey, especially thanks for agreeing to join us. I knew Joey Wise when he was just this great, goofy trumpet playing kid. Great smile, great personality, outgoing, lots of fun. And he still is all these things. But the Joey Wise I know now has become a real mensch, which does not surprise me at all. But what does surprise me is Joey is not, if not a better Jew than me, is certainly a more observant Jew than me. And how does that happen coming from in Fall Creek, Wisconsin? So I'm hoping we'll hear a little about his journey spiritually or intellectually or whatever from Fall Creek to Jerusalem and
back to Eau Claire.
And back to Eau Claire.
And then
not to Fall Creek, to Eau Claire, but and
then to Milwaukee.
yes, and so you can take it away. You can do this any way you want. If you prefer it as just conversation, questions, everybody kibitzing, whatever, or if you want to just tell us a little about your life today.
Okay, we could probably do a little of both. But the first thing is, Maury, it's not a competition. I try to tell my wife that also if a family has more kids than her. So it's not a competition. We're not seeing who can go furthest the fastest. It's really all about individual like spiritual growth. So I could start by giving a little bit of background and kind of talk about the journey. But I really think that there's sort of like two parts, or maybe like two dynamics or two perspectives of how to look at the journey that I took. One is just what happened. It's sort of like the maybe the history of events from about 20 years ago until today of how I got from Fall Creek to Jerusalem and then back. But I think the underlying, sort of the underpinning part is maybe more interesting, which might be more of the philosophical or anthropological perspective of maybe the underlying drive of why that journey took place. So one of the things that I always think about when people ask me, like, how did you get there? That's so exotic. It's interesting. Like, what really drove you? And so in my mind, it's not really that exotic and it's not really that interesting, because I think most of us, if we look at our lives, we're sort of on this path of migration of looking for what we need, whether it be our career profession needs or our life needs, which sort of environment do we want to, where do we want to live, what cities or towns, green, desert, etc. And then the third need that I think we all have, which is a bit different than maybe the rest of the animals in the animal kingdom, is really the pursuit of spirituality, which you might say spirituality, religion, or meaning, and maybe some of those kind of go in the same category. And so I think that for me is when I think about my journey and when I analyze it, it's really that quest for meaning and really sort of looking for internal identity and looking to see what I identify as has really been the driving factor of what took me around the world and back to where I started, to where I was getting to go. So I think that's the kind of the baseline. And what's actually really interesting for me, and I think a lot of people that kind of go through a similar thing, coming from maybe a traditional Jewish background and becoming more observant, is a lot of the stories, especially in the first part of the Torah, from the stories in Bereshit and Genesis, the stories of all of the forefathers, Abraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov, like as they travel with their families and what they go through. So, I think one of the misfortunate things about a lot of people when they look at the Bible is they take it too literal almost, right? And they'll say, well, like this is what it says, and we don't really do that today, and it doesn't make sense, so we'll just throw out the baby with the bathwater. And so I think a lot of the identities that we go through, and if we look at the Bible more as sort of an anthropological way of really understanding our relationships with people, what's interesting about the Torah is that it's not like your typical Harry Potter book, right? Where like the main character is always good and always wins in the end, right? Like the Bible doesn't work that way. Like
I
it's
thought you meant it wasn't done on scrolls.
right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, but that's the interesting thing is like as you read through it, you see people that had difficult times in their life, right? Like Jacob, for example, he had 12 sons. One was sold into slavery. Like that was a challenging experience. Like he was separated from his father. Also with Jacob, he went north to find find somebody to get married to, and he was separated from his father for 22 years. So we see a lot of the stories in the Bible that if we look at them from like, what can I really learn from the story? So a lot of it is what their quest was of the forefathers, was really this quest or the migration process for, search for meaning and spirituality, and how that related to them building their families in a way that was, holistic and healthy for their families. They moved away from factors that they thought were not healthy for their families to grow up in, and they were moving towards some sort of environment and way of thinking and belief system and meaning that they thought would be conducive for raising a family and a culture, etc. So a lot of those stories, once they started becoming more observant, let's say, were very, very meaningful for me, because you feel like you're relating to those stories, and then you kind of see like, wow, by reading through these stories, it can actually provide quite a bit of perspective to the journey that I was taking. So,
I just want to interrupt with a quick question. if
no
that's
problem.
okay.
Yeah. And if
About
anybody has questions.
when did this start? When did the wheels start turning in your mind? Was this when you were 12 or 15 or 18 or 20?
It's a good question. So I think a lot of the introspective thought process was much later. I think much of it was subconscious in the beginning. So I wouldn't say at like age 17 or 18 when I decided to maybe go to Israel, it was like, oh, I'm on a quest for meaning. Like this is where I have to go. But as I look back and as I've done a lot more thinking about it, being a bit philosophical about my life, going through my midlife crisis, right? So like a lot of those things, that's kind of how I'm interpreting it now. So it's a bit different. So I could go through a few of the events of sort of, I guess, what led me to get to Israel, which is interesting. And then again, if anybody has any questions, just interrupt and we can have kind of a discussion. So I think that the main factor, and it's good that you're recording it, because Yossi Gordon, who was the rabbi here when I was growing up, he sent me an email on Friday. He said, I wish I could be here for your talk, but he couldn't. So we'll have to send him the recording or send him the link to the YouTube. So when we were growing up, Yossi was the rabbi. There wasn't very many kids. I don't know, maybe 8 or 9 or maybe 6 or 7, something like that. But Yossi, he helped us with our bar mitzvahs and bat mitzvahs. And one of the things that, me being an extrovert like my mother, so I was always very interested in social activities. So summer camp was important for me, and anything that was social was actually important to me. So one of the things that Yossi suggested is that I joined the USY chapter from Minneapolis, because there's not one in Eau Claire, and that's the closest one. Although, like, effectively, like in the USY, I think like Wisconsin is really part of like the Chicago chapter. So I was kind of breaking the rules, but that didn't really matter. So he suggested that I join USY, which was a great experience for me.
How old were you at this point?
This was 8th grade.
8th grade.
Yeah. So this was after bar mitzvah. Yeah.
What is USY?
USY stands for United Synagogue Youth. So maybe there's a whole bunch of different youth groups like BBYO. In England, there's FZY. There's
The Reform Movement has NIFTY, National Federation
Exactly,
of
right.
Temple Youth.
NCSY is for the modern Orthodox. Is NCSY. So there's a whole bunch of these different. There's a whole bunch of different youth group movements. It just happens to be that Yossi being affiliated with Beth Jacob, which is a conservative shul in Mendota Heights. So that's where he recommended me to go, which was fantastic. So that was sort of my kind of the opening engagement into a real Jewish youth group. So I was part of USY for like all through high school. So I went to many of the more major events because it was kind of a schlep to get to Minneapolis. So the regional sort of Shabbatonim and stuff. A few years I went to Camp Herzl as well. But after the gap year programs in Israel are very, very popular with most of the kids that are involved in the youth groups. So
Just interrupt, gap year is in like after senior year in high school.
after senior year in high school, exactly. So I'm not really sure. I think also my mother was quite was pushing us to do some sort of experience in Israel after high school or during high school. Again, I'm not really sure exactly because when we were in high school, so my brother was going to do the Young Judea Year Course program, and then the same year I was trying to do another program with was that Ken Priest's son? Who was the son that went to Beit Hashita?
Barry and Susan Gross.
Susan Gross, yeah. So we had a family friend, yeah, that there was a year program in high school that you'd be on a kibbutz Beit Hashita. So if you go to Israel and you buy pickles, you probably will buy Beit Hashita pickles because they're one of the manufacturers of pickles. But they have a year program in high school. So Ray was looking to go on a year program with Young Judea, which is a American Zionist organization funded by Hadassah. And the same year I was going to do a high school program with Beit Hashita. So it happened to be
You might mention Ray's
my
years
brother,
older.
2 years older, yeah. We were going to do it. He was going to do after high school, and I was going to do, I guess, junior year in high school. And then that happened to be the year that the second Intifada broke out. So I don't know what that was, 2002 or something. So the programs weren't canceled, but a lot of the kids didn't go because their parents were nervous, which rightfully so. I think that was probably a good idea that we didn't go.
I thought they closed Beit Hashita.
Beit Hashita maybe, but Young Judea they didn't. I don't think. Anyway, so we didn't go that year. But because that had already kind of started the ball rolling, so Ray didn't end up going on a program, but I was kind of set on going on Young Judea after I finished high school. So after high school, I went on Young Judea year course. It's interesting actually because USY also has a year program called Nativ, I think it's called, or that's what it used to be called, and it was actually too religious for me. So I decided that I wanted to go something a little bit less religious. So Young Judea is just it's I guess it would be similar to like Birthright, I think, in the philosophy that the goal there is you do a lot of traveling when you go to Israel. So part of the time you do a few courses like Zionism and some basic stuff, which was really not interesting to me at the time. But afterwards, I actually went back and learned much about it because the Zionist history is quite interesting. It's actually quite brutal and bloody in a lot of places, but it is quite interesting. So part of the courses was to get college credits, and then a lot of the course was actually to travel around the country, which was actually a phenomenal experience. My assumption is that most Israelis don't get to do all the things that we get to do, because a lot of the places that you could go outside and travel, it's like in the middle of the desert, and the only way that you can actually do it is if you have like a program with like tanks of water and like shipping your stuff. So it was a really great experience to actually go and see a lot of parts of Israel that if you're not on a program like that, you probably would never get to see. And then the third part of the trip is either to do some volunteering or to do sort of like a mock boot camp with the army. So I chose volunteering, which I worked on a moshav, which is kind of like a communal farm, a little bit different than a kibbutz. And I worked with the family there for about 2 months. In fact, I'm still close with the family. We go and visit them. They have a sheep farm in the northern part of Israel. And
what's the difference between a mushav and a kibbutz?
So the difference is a kibbutz is like communistic, and a moshav would maybe be more like socialistic. That would maybe be the best description. So
Smaller as well.
No, they could be the same size. Yeah, it's like now again, like today, there's very few kibbutzim that still run as kibbutzim. Like the old-fashioned kibbutzim, like they didn't even have kitchens in your house because everybody ate in like a communal dining hall. Like they had like a communal laundry service, and like everything was really, really like communistic or communal. And the moshavim were more like you have a farm, like you have your house, you have your land, what you're doing, and then some of the like tractor, they would have like kind of a community sort of pool where you could share tractors or different things. So it was a little bit more independent. And again, today most of the moshavim are just like normal towns or villages, and most of the kibbutzim have privatized, and people are like living normal. And a lot of them have actually increased their population and revenue by actually just selling plots of land for private housing, and that's how they've kind of moved forward. So those movements are a little bit less than they used to be. So that was sort of my year course experience. Again, it was a really great experience. And then towards the end of year course or during year course, one of the things, this is also kind of funny. One of the things that they have in Israel is that if you want to go to experience like an Orthodox Shabbat experience, so you're able to. There's a few different organizations that you can sign up with, and then they'll send you to like a family, like in the old city of Jerusalem, or really any other place in Israel if you want to like experience that. So there's one guy that runs an organization. His name is Jeff Seidel. And he's primarily in the universities in Israel as well as the old city to set people up with Shabbos meals, or it's kind of like maybe a Halo house, maybe equivalent that you'd have in a university here. And he also has a directory. So like if you're traveling worldwide and you can't find a Chabad, so you can look at his directory, and he'll basically have people that live all over the world that you could go to if you need to spend Shabbat with somebody. So everybody told us when we got there, don't go to Jeff Seidel because he'll brainwash you and you'll become religious. So me and a friend of mine, who actually I met a few weeks ago for the first time in 15 years, so we decided like we're going to go, and it's not going to work, right? So it did work though. So he introduced us maybe 6 or 7 weeks once we got there. So this friend of mine, there's a place to go rock climbing outdoors right outside the old city. So we went on Friday to rock climbing, and then we decided to go to Jeff Seidel's, and then he would set us for a meal because like what's better than free food, right? After a long day of hiking and stuff. So we showed up there.
Especially when you're how old? Like
Yeah,
20?
17 or 18. Yeah, exactly. So we showed up. I'm not sure if any of you have been to the hotel in the old city, but like you show up on Friday night and it's like totally packed. You know, there's a lot of people. And Jeff Seidel is he's about 5'3" and he's bald, and he wears like these bowling style shoes, like where it's like white and brown, like I don't know, there's a style like that. And that's like his big thing. Like everybody, like on his website, you have a picture of his shoes because like everybody knows he wears his shoes untied. Like he's a real character. Like he's from New York, like from, I don't know, like Brooklyn or something. And he has that like, you know, every sentence is only 4 words. And if it gets to 5 words, it's like already like a little bit too complex. Like everything's like short and sweet, you know, like a real New Yorker. So we got so we were there and we had like all of our hiking stuff and our climbing stuff, and the whole place is packed and we were like dirty and smelly, you know, but like we didn't think of anything of it. So when I didn't know this at the time, but afterwards Jeff told me about it. So I guess when we showed up, we'd already called Jeff and told him we're coming. So we got there and we told them our names. And I guess the people that we were supposed to go to saw us, and they were like, we can't take those people. Like they're like 2, right? So anyway, Jeff's a good guy. So he said that was the last time that, like, he's like, I didn't speak to them anymore. Like if they're not accepting the people that come to my thing, they're off my list. So he's like, oh, I know where I'll send them. I'll send them to the Shore family. So the Shore family was a family that I've been close with since. And a large family, they have 9 kids. And so, but they were like the family that if you could always send to them because they always had like, you know, 20 people at their house, like very big. So, so they sent me to the Shore family, and it was just like, it was like a circus, you know, very fun, a lot of kids, probably like our house is today, right? And, but just very warm people from Toronto originally. So we had a really good time. And so then we thought like, this is fantastic, right? Every Friday night we get free food, right? So, and when we left, they gave us their card because they don't run on Shabbos, right? So they have like business cards that they give out and say, if you ever want to come back, you can come back, right? So we were like, score, free food every Friday night. And like the spread was like incredible. It was like lasagna and kugels and carrot cakes. Like it was like, we were just, yeah, it couldn't have been any better, right? So I started going and joining their family almost every Shabbat for at least one meal to get enough free food. Yeah, and so I became very close to their family. So they live in the old city, a really beautiful house in the old city. So, you know, over the years we got very close. We would, we like top ropes on their house, and we would belay the kids off the walls and do like a lot of fun stuff. So that was probably one of the more influential parts, is that, week after week, spending time with them on Shabbat, and kind of to go back to the meaning perspective of the story, it was something that I was really interested in emulating. Like we grew up in Fall Creek, which wasn't extremely Jewish, but a lot of the things that we had were very similar to the lifestyle that they were having with kind of an Orthodox or observant family, of being together as a family, spending time with a family, having dinner together with a family. And so those were all things that I grew up with and were meaningful for me growing up, even though I didn't always enjoy it. But in retrospect, it was nice. And so those were all things that I thought, like, hey, if this is how, if having an observant lifestyle will help facilitate this sort of lifestyle together as a family. So I thought that was something that was quite interesting. So that was maybe one of the driving factors.
I'm going to interrupt with a question, if that's okay, because this is all great. I mean, I really like all the stuff you're telling us, but what I'm wondering is, that's like, it's interesting. I think of Judaism, and I think there are others that can address this much better, is, and I will explain to non-Jews, a lot is just how you live more than a specific belief structure. It's a way of life.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you're describing it as having some similarities to what it was like for you, as a kid in Fall Creek, which isn't, as you said, a very Jewish place, other than your family. And probably now that your parents are here, it's probably zero Jewish. But
Right.
But was it? There's some spirituality. It's not just I'm going to adopt this Jewish lifestyle without necessarily taking on the beliefs. I'm just curious. Is it they're both parts of the same package? I'm not asking this well, but
no, I get the question. So I think for me the interesting. So there's another factor. I just want to say one other thing, and then I'll come back to this. So the other factor that was very interesting for me with in Judaism in general is that, like, growing up, I'm not saying I'm a genius, but I definitely am very interested in intellectual pursuits. And so for me, like, school was just not very engaging. It was very easy. It wasn't really engaging. And not all the teachers that were teaching were really interested in teaching. They were there, like, it was their job, and so it wasn't really interesting. And so one of the things that was really fascinating about Judaism is that when you get into more of the academic part of religious Judaism and learning Talmud and learning Halakha and Shulchan Aruch and different things, the amount of brain power that you have to put into it and thinking and the philosophy behind it is quite incredible. And so it's really, really engaging. And for me, that was something that was really appealing as well. And so to kind of bring it back to Maury's question, is that one of the unique things that I find about Judaism, and again, I didn't research a lot of other religions and look into other things, so I'm not trying to compare, but one of the things that I found in Judaism that was interesting is it's not one thing, right? It's not just like, let's meditate and be spiritual. It's not like, what are the rules? Yes and no. It's not just how do we run a family. It's the whole kind of composition of Judaism is really, it's an entire culture and like an entire life cycle and etc. Like, if you go back and if you like look the historical, like from the beginning of the Bible until the end of the destruction of the Second Temple, and then onwards into the Jews living in the diaspora, like the Jewish culture, it's a whole culture around how do we live, from like every step of the day. And when you go through halacha, like the Jewish law, it actually says, like, this is how you should tie your shoes, this is how you should cut your fingernails, this is how you should wake up in the morning. So the structure that it provides to life is kind of like a fundamental structure of like, how are we gonna create a civilization that we can imbue into the civilization meaning with all of the ritual that we go through, that we can have a legal structure, that we can live in harmony and make sure that we know how to deal with different things, how we can have a spiritual structure so we can find meaning in our life, how we can connect to spirituality, how do we deal with things like grief, how do we deal with things like happiness and joy, how do we deal with making sure that we have time off for ourselves, like Shabbat and holidays, etc. So what for me was really interesting is that the more and more like deeper I got into the observance level, is that I could just see how it was an encompassing system that was really able to provide a lot for a family structure, for a personal structure, for pursuing sort of internal beliefs, external beliefs, and really kind of guiding you of how to live sort of on a day-to-day basis within a community as well. So it's not just like I'm setting up my own commune in a specific place and I can't relate to anybody. Like, it's one of the beauties about Judaism is that whenever you go any place and you meet, I mean, Israelis are all over the place, right? So like whenever you happen to be in like Argentina or any place in the world and you find like another Jewish person, like that social structure that's been created, whether or not you're observant or not, but you see another Jewish person and you immediately have that connection because you have all of that cultural history together and you can really connect with it. So I think all of that together, which kind of started with, going to somebody's house and eating free food, right? It's sort of like an entrance point, but a lot of, that kind of concept, but in many different areas of life was sort of the real appeal of becoming more and more observant, of getting more engaged. Did that answer your question?
Yeah,
Kind of? Okay,
yeah.
cool. So towards the end, to continue the story, and then if anybody has any other questions, you're welcome to stop me and interrupt.
Well, that you mentioned Jeff is from New York and then his family is from Toronto. So it sounds
They're
like,
two different people.
I know, but so it sounds like a lot of these people are not from Israel. And
Most, yeah.
How many of the people that helped you on your journey were actual Israelis from birth?
Probably very few. Very few. But Israel's like, you rarely get to anybody in Israel that's more than like 2 or 3 generations. I mean, even like a lot of the Israelis that I work with that are Israeli, like they were born in Israel, I would say 90% of their families are not from Israel.
Okay, had made aliyah.
Yeah, right. I mean, so many people came. Like in India, there was something like 30,000 Jews until 1950, and after they all moved, right? So like, I think around like 1950, with the ending of the Holocaust, expulsion from most of the Arab countries, Persia, Iraq, Iran. Iran is Persia, right? But North Africa, with all of those people that came over, like the family that I lived with in the Moshav, the mother was from Tunisia. She grew up in Tunisia until she was about 17, and they fled Tunisia in like the 1950s. The father's parents were Holocaust survivors from, I think, Hungary or Romania. So like, again, they were Israeli because they both had been there for a long time, but like, yeah, I mean, less than one. Like the father was born in Israel, but the mother was born in Tunisia. So I would say most of the people that, by the way, this family that I was living with on the Moshav, they were very traditional. So like on Shabbat, they would keep a little bit of Shabbat. Like they wouldn't light fires on Shabbat, but they would watch TV. But the father of the family, he was like extremely patriotic and very knowledgeable as well. Like he knew a lot about, a lot of like Jewish holidays and festivals and everything. And it was interesting because he would probably classify himself as maybe like anti-religious. And the fact that he was so patriotic about Israel, he was probably one of the biggest driving factors of me to be more interested in becoming more observant and more Jewish. So there was a lot of different people, and a lot of the influences just came from different places. But I think the core driving factor was just that I found that it was a lifestyle that really drove a lot of meaning and was a way of having sort of a healthy community and kind of a framework to live in. So I think that was kind of the main thing. Okay, is that good enough?
Perfect.
Okay, just making sure, because if it's not, we can talk about it more.
Can I just ask a
Yeah.
question? You've said a couple times that your journey from Fall Creek to Jerusalem, Israel, and back to Fall Creek. Now, you're not moving back here, I'm assuming, right? You're just visiting?
No, we're moving to Milwaukee, actually.
Seriously? Oh
We're moving
my,
to Milwaukee.
okay, I suspected, but I just wanted, wow,
Yeah.
that's
What's
a
the
big change.
attraction of Milwaukee?
Close enough, but not too close. No, no, that's not true. The attraction of Milwaukee is that in Milwaukee and Racine County, they have a voucher system for schooling.
Oh.
So the schooling will be subsidized. That's one attraction. The second attraction is the Milwaukee community is a highly I can't think of the word right now, but like is a very well spoken about community, the Jewish community there. It was one of the I don't want to say largest, but it was a very it was a community that was very receptive to a lot of Holocaust survivors. Where it's actually an interesting dynamic that many of the Jewish communities in America weren't extremely receptive to survivors of the Holocaust when they first came over, because they didn't really like it was too hard to believe what they went through, and afterwards, like the post what we would call today post traumatic stress disorder, which didn't really exist, they didn't have that term probably in the 50s or 40s, but it was it was so bad, it was really hard to relate to these people because things would happen, like they would hear loud noises, or like if you talk to some of the kids of Holocaust survivors, like when they would go to school, their mother would be like, okay, this is how you're going, but you need to have a backup route in case something happens, right? And so there was a lot of these things, and it was really hard to relate.
Just to interrupt with one comment on that, and I have a pretty good novel written by a Jewish guy in Savannah, fiction, called Among the Living. It's about a family bringing in a Holocaust surviving cousin into the Savannah Jewish community. But I think maybe another part of it, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is sort of during the very assimilationist period, like late 40s, early 50s, it's sort of like, oh, these people coming from Europe are too Jewish. Right.
That was probably also part of it as well. Yeah. But anyway, so Milwaukee took in a lot of Holocaust survivors. The first rabbi in Milwaukee from the Torsky family of the community that we're going to be in, so I think he arrived in Milwaukee between the two world wars, and so he had sort of a history with the European Jewry, and so I think that's why they were more accepting, or they really accepted the survivors that came afterwards. But it has a great reputation. The people that live there really like it. So there's the community there is something that is sought after as well. So besides for the cold weather, which people from Wisconsin, I guess, are okay with, the community there is spoken very highly of. The school systems there is quite good as well. So that's kind of how we chose Milwaukee.
So then a quick
Follow up
comment to that. How are your parents feeling about this
good
news?
You'll have to ask them, but since I'm the keynote speaker, you're gonna have to ask them afterwards. No, I think we're all excited about it. Yeah.
Yes, that's great. And your brother?
My brother still lives in Israel.
Yeah, he's staying here.
Yeah.
So you're here now for good. You're here.
That's right. All of our stuff is on a boat. So.
And your
common.
family, your
They're all
wife and
here.
children?
They're not in shul right now, but we're all here. Yeah, they all wanted to come with me, so I guess I'm doing an okay job.
Hear them if they were all in jail.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Oh, rental house there.
Yeah. So, yeah.
Wow.
They're right next door.
Yeah, they're right next door. Yeah. So
Wow.
We have lovely sounds that come in the window.
yeah, they're my
Absolutely.
children know how to
We
make.
have lovely sounds when we open the window.
Oh.
Yeah. Early in the
Lovely
morning.
to you, maybe not to Joey.
It's okay.
Grandparents enjoy these things.
I got noise cancellation headphones. So
When do you head out to Milwaukee then?
we're gonna go down on Tuesday to set up things, and then school starts the 1st of September.
That's why Maury was sort of itching to get Joey to come
Sure,
before they
Yeah,
leave.
absolutely. Yeah.
And I do have to say, this was really Maury's
Well,
energy
but
that.
this is, but
led
it's
to
Joey's
this.
energy, and I want to get back to
Well, I
Joey's
know.
energy.
But you deserve credit.
I kind of had assumed that when you moved to Israel, that was making aliyah, and learned from you that it's becoming a citizen. Was that just a practical decision, or spiritual, or
It's a good question.
intellectual, or some combination?
Okay, so most of the questions that you're going to ask are probably not going to get really straightforward, easy answers. It's going to be a little bit complex.
Confusing answers are the best.
I don't know if I ever made a decision to permanently live in Israel. So after year course, I went to a yeshiva for many years. Again, most of the time in the yeshiva, I was actually on a student visa because you don't need to make aliyah to do that, and I didn't really want to make aliyah until I knew that I needed to be Israeli for many different reasons. Primarily, I wasn't interested at that point in time to go to the army. If I would have made aliyah before 25 without having a wife and kids, I probably would have gone to the army or had to, or escaped it, one or the other. So I didn't want to deal with that, so I stayed on the student visa. But most of the time during that period, I was there because I was either going to yeshiva or going to university. But I hadn't really made like a conscious decision, like this is where I'm going to be for the rest of my life. And that's probably why we were able to move back now, is because we still hadn't really made that decision of this is where we're going to be for the rest of our life. I think part of that is really just like my philosophy with life, of that like life keeps changing, and like you have to continuously like balance what are your priorities, and therefore you have to be a bit flexible in order to go through that. So that's kind of what brought me back. But I get like the rest of the story from leaving Judea in my mind is maybe just normal or less interesting. I spent a few years in yeshiva, a few different yeshivas. Yeshiva is the experience in yeshiva is quite interesting.
Do you want to explain what yeshiva is for
Yeah.
some people who might not know?
Yeah. So I'll explain. So what a yeshiva is, the word yeshiva means like, it comes from the word of like sitting or being in one place. Or like yeshuv, the word yeshuv means like a town. So it's the same sort of word. The Hebrew language, for people that don't know, it's a root-based language. So there's specific, what they call a shorish or a root, which is either 3 or 4 letters put together, and then you conjugate those letters in a whole bunch of different ways, and you get a whole bunch of different words. So like the word for shoe and tying your shoe comes from the same word, or like a settlement or to sit, or come from the same words. And then it gets confusing when you have the same word, the same root letter or shorish, but they actually mean opposite things. But for some reason they're the same. So there are some things that are a little bit confusing, but it actually makes the language a bit easier, in one way easier to learn, because if you can start to identify what a shorish is of a word, so then you can actually start getting a little bit more context of maybe what the meanings are, etc. So what a yeshiva is it's basically like a college for Judaic studies, effectively. The word is pretty broad because there's a lot of different areas in, let's say, Torah learning or rabbinical learning that you can focus on. The 2 main things that they focus on in yeshiva, one would be called the Talmud, which is, maybe we won't go into right now exactly what that is, but if anybody wants to go into it more, we could go into have a side discussion. So one would be like a Talmud, which is a little bit more general. It's a little bit more vague in terms of like the outcomes from like a Jewish law perspective. And then the second part that is really focused on is what we would call Shulchan Aruch or Halacha or Jewish law, which is basically the conclusions that came out of the Talmud from like a day-to-day status of like, what can you do on Shabbat, what can't you do on Shabbat, sort of like the day-to-day laws, like everything to do with like marriage or divorce or death, mourning, holidays, court cases. All of these things are basically documented in a huge 4-set volume of what we call Shulchan Aruch, which is just every single Jewish part of Jewish law, and it's categorized. And what that is just it's the outcomes of the Talmud, which are basically the recordations of all of these discussions that happened when the Torah was still, when a lot of the learning was still oral. All of that was recorded, those discussions, and then they refined it down into what we call Shulchan Aruch. So in yeshiva, there's usually 2 tracks. There's either the Gemara track or the legal track, and a lot of times it's blended and it's mixed up. But it's a really engaging experience. It's much different than any university learning track that you might think about. It's I guess what it would be like if you mixed like math, law, philosophy, and literature with a rugby game at the same time. So you might have sort of that might be a good way of thinking of it, because the studies, whenever you study, so you'll study with a partner, with like a chavrusa. So everything that you're doing, you're going back and forth, and you're discussing, and you're thinking about and analyzing. So if you walk into a Beit Midrash, which is a study hall, it'll be extremely noisy because everybody is talking, and depending on how heated the discussion gets, so some people are talking louder than others, and so like it's really really interactive, which is kind of nice. So if it's only like this many people, it's not very loud, but a lot of the bigger yeshivas will have 500-600 people in one hall. So you like walk in and it's just like a roar of like, a roar of noise, and it's quite exciting. It's quite engaging. It's really interesting to be in an environment where there's that much energy going on at one time. So yeshiva was a really great experience because it's something that maybe there's other places that learn philosophy in that sort of manner, but in yeshiva you do it. So I spent about 5 or 6 years in different yeshivas, and again, every yeshiva kind of has its own like nuance, right? Like different ways of doing things, different ways of thinking, and a lot of it is just based on like who were the teachers in those yeshivas, like how did they think, what is their background, etc. And a lot of that permeated through. And then in the meantime of yeshiva, I got married, went back to university, had some kids, started working, and then eventually we earlier this year we made the decision that we decided for a whole bunch of different reasons, partly my parents, partly just wanting to do something new. That's when we decided to move back to Milwaukee. Yes.
What did you study at university?
I got an MBA. Okay, so if you want to know about my university's topics, my goal in university was to get the best degree with the least amount of effort. So it was either psychology. No, not psychology. Yeah, like psychology, not psychology. What's the other thing? Not psychology. The other kind.
Psychology.
What?
Education.
Sociology.
No, I don't know. It was either something like, yeah, whatever. It was, or it was like you either get your business degree or you get like sociology or something, right? Because like those two things, whatever. So like I went and got my business degree. There was a year MBA program at Bar-Ilan University, which they actually asked me like, why did you choose Bar-Ilan? So I said it was the easiest way to get your MBA.
Is that what you said?
Yeah, I told them that. They weren't really impressed with that answer, but I said like, hey, you want.
So you went for the credential rather than for the learning.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So the truth is, it worked out well for me because the CEO of the company that I eventually worked for was an alumni from the same program about 6 or 7 years earlier. So I don't know if that's why he chose me, but like I think that it probably had some factor in it.
Did he go for the same reason?
I don't know. Maybe I didn't actually ask him. Yeah, I mean
Just curious.
that was my reason. The truth is well, okay, I'm being recorded, so I don't know. I didn't think that the coursework was actually that stellar at that program. I think that they could have probably made it a lot better because there's so many interesting things like getting MBA. Like they had a few good courses. They had a really good course with an investment banker who it was like that was a really awesome course. And then whatever, there was a few things that were really good, but I didn't think their curriculum was fantastic. Yeah.
So the MBA program, was that in Hebrew or
No, it was in English.
And what about yeshiva? Is that all in Hebrew or
Oh,
a
so-
mixture?
Okay, so the MBA program, the one that I went to, Bar-Ilan, has an English one.
Okay.
So a lot of the universities in Israel will have English tracks
Okay.
because there's so many people coming from different places. So like the Weitzman Institution, I have actually a friend from Eau Claire that came for a semester in the Weitzman. He was getting his PhD in some field of science. I don't remember what it was. But a lot of the universities will have like an English track because there's so many English-speaking students from either Europe, England, or the United States, Australia, South Africa. Now, yeshiva is interesting because in yeshiva, all of the texts are original language. So, like Talmud will typically be a cross between English and not English, Hebrew and Aramaic, which is
Mostly is Aramaic.
yeah, mostly Aramaic. I mean, there's a lot of similarities. Like you get used to it. Like to learn Talmud, like you have to like learn the language. It's kind of maybe like learning like I don't know, Shakespeare in the original language or something. Like you have to get what?
That's English.
No, I know, but
There's a different English.
Chaucer.
Yeah, Chaucer. Yeah,
Yeah,
right. That's what I was thinking.
Chaucer.
Chaucer. Yeah, like Middle English, right? Like you're gonna have some crossovers, but it is a bit different. So, but the actual so in yeshiva, when it comes to the text will be in that language, but when it comes to like going to like a course or something, the language that like the rabbi or maybe like the professor, right, would be speaking. So you could get anything, right? So like I went to yeshivas that they spoke English, but there's like you could go to a yeshiva that everybody speaks in Hebrew or everybody speaks in Yiddish, or they even have some yeshivas that will be other languages. Yes.
Where's your wife from?
My wife is no, not from Milwaukee. My wife was born in Jerusalem. She grew up most of her life in Beit Shemesh in Jerusalem, like a cross between. Her father is originally from New York, and her mother's from South Africa. So the big joke is that I married an African American because so I actually was joking with some guy that I met in the old city one time, and so he's like, oh really? Does your wife look like Beyonce? And I said, not exactly, but it's interesting. Actually, one of the rental apartments that my parents rented, we met this guy from, I think he was from Milwaukee. Remember that guy? Yeah. So his parents were Moroccan originally, so he had a Moroccan passport. So I think he went to UW Madison or something. So when he got there, he actually applied for affirmative action because he was African, right? And so it took a long time, but he eventually got it because he's technically African American. So I don't know.
Just to interrupt just with a thought, I'd be interested from Aviad and Alon, as Israelis, thoughts they might have, having taken kind of a one-way journey from Israel to the U.S., not the U.S. to Israel and back.
They have an open-ended ticket, Maury.
Yeah.
It's always open-ended.
Right. Yeah, good point. But curious as to any thoughts you guys.
So I don't want to steal a thunder from the keynote speaker now, but I've been listening, and it's quite remarkable how many things that Joey has said. We actually have parallel experiences. For example, I got my bachelor's degree at Bar Ilan University.
And did you say you wanted to?
Yeah, what?
Did you say it was because it was the easiest way to get a good degree?
You know what? I actually thought that my studies were not so easy.
No, I think
but
no, I think that the Israeli program at Bar Ilan is much better than the American. Like the American one is like all the universities have these 1-year MBAs, so you have to have it because you want to be competitive, right? And you can get whatever. So I think the Israeli version was actually far superior.
Other things. I mean, it's interesting that. So in my life, I met many Americans that actually made the opposite way. I mean, came from the States to Israel. I met many people in the military, for example. And I always ask them the same thing. What were you thinking when you were 18? I mean, you could have gone to college now, have an amazing college life, enjoy your life now, date all the girls you want and all that, and you still came here to crawl in the dirt next to me and defend a country that's not yours that you were born in.
Yeah.
It's interesting how the Jewish DNA at the end of the day brings us together. And what Joey said is that whenever you go, and I travel across the world, and I met many Jewish people, many Israeli, but of course when I was traveling because they were all over the place. But it's interesting how you can affiliate to people, no matter what the background is. I can always find common language with Israelis or Jews all over the world.
Yeah.
How long has your family been? I mean, did your ancestors come from?
Yeah, so same thing. I mean, my mom was born in Poland. My dad was born in Israel, but his parents survived the Holocaust. They came from Hungary, Czechoslovakia. My family name is Fuchs, so originally,
Are you related to the famous Fuchs?
Which one?
The one from the store, Fox Home?
In Germany, you mean?
No, in Israel.
Fuchs.
Avram Fuchs, who owns,
Fox, like Fox.
Yeah, but they spell it Fuchs.
No, probably not. But yeah, point being is that there's a lot of common experiences.
And Alon,
Well, from my father's side, I'm third generation in Israel. My mother's side, she came from Yemen when she was 7 years old. Of course, he's a lot younger than me, so we have more stuff than I do.
And climbing, by the way, it's also a great bonding because for example, I used to climb there a lot back in the day. This place is falling apart.
That's where I was. Yeah.
Do you still go climbing?
I was just in the gym.
Okay.
I'd go to the gym.
All right, that's fine.
We went to like Ain Parat a bit.
All right. We'll talk about it.
Yeah, so I think that's more or less. If people have more questions, be happy to.
Why don't we do, since a few others have joined us, run through with another very quick round of introductions. And that'll also
I had
reinforce
hoped I
our
had missed that part.
Pardon?
I had hoped I had missed
Oh,
that
yeah,
part.
okay.
Maureen.
Well,
We're gonna start with you.
Oh, and we were just doing the, no more than a 20-minute one.
So we're not passing the conch and each taking a turn as the
Yeah.
keynote speaker.
Yeah. Travis, I'll let you start.